feet long, so 19 and 3 inches long, 19 feet 3 inches long. And this is an alligator tooth. So if that right there is the alligator tooth, but compared to the egg, it's actually a little bit longer than the egg. Give you an idea of how big these things go. And alligators grow teeth throughout their lives. They'll go through 2,000 to 3,000 teeth in their lifetime. And they'll live probably 30 to 50 years. Their life expectancy is about the same as us humans. And they'll weigh around 500 pounds. I think the largest one that was caught recently was actually 750 pounds, around there. So I've got right here a little wiggle worm. This is our little baby alligator. And he's just kind of wiggling around right here, kind of trying to stay warm. So this is our little baby alligator that we have at the park. We keep him, and he's about 1.5 to 2 years old. And he'll slowly stop wiggling around once he gets used to being on the camera. So we use him for different programs and such, just like this. Used to, when we did things live, we could actually let people pet him when he calmed down. And you just touch them. And you, at this age, their skin is very soft. It's not like the skin I showed earlier, which is really hard. These things are very soft. They're very gentle. They only, at this size, they only really eat insects. They're not going to eat big things. Once they go to large size, though, they'll eat anything they can fit in their mouths. And a lot of people like question, you know, what's this guy's name? And we don't name our animals at the park because we don't want people thinking, you know, these are not pets. You know, you name a pet, that's part of your family. We don't name our animals because we don't want people thinking, oh, that's so cute, I want one as a pet. So we don't name them, kind of keep people from encouraging them to catch them as pets. So this is about 1.5 years. This is more of about half of their age, at about 30, I think, would be this guy. Because I see inside 16. So I'm not sure this guy's age, but you can tell he's not a very old one, but he's still large. But you can tell a big size difference there. Put that down. So, like I said, I'm not going to go too long on this. And I see in the chat here, what are the predators of the young alligators? So that's a good question. So a lot of people think these guys are top of the food chain. They're going to eat everything. What people don't realize at this age, everything that can eat them, that can fit these guys in the mouth, they're going to eat them, including birds. Birds love baby alligators. Raccoons, they love to eat these things. Opossums, pretty much any small animal will actually find these things and love them because at this age, they're very, you know, they don't have any good defenses. You look on their back, this guy has a lot of different colors. Where if you go online and you look at a grown alligator, they don't have hardly any markings. They're all just black scales. And at this age, that's all camouflage. They sit in the water and they hide. At this age, also, they'll be sitting at the top of the water, floating, and the mother alligator will actually be at the bottom watching them. And if anything tries to come and mess with them, the mother alligator shoots up and gets whatever's trying to eat them. So a lot of things will actually eat these guys at this age. So how many teeth do the babies have? I'm not entirely sure how many the babies have. They'll have up to around 80 teeth when they're fully grown at a time, but they constantly lose them. They'll wear them down. They'll miss them, get rid of some, and then they grow more. So it'll be probably at this age, probably between 30 and 80. It just varies because they're still growing. Do Nutria eat young alligators, or are Nutria vegetarians? So Nutria, they actually just eat grass. They're a big nuisance in South Louisiana eating marsh grass. So they're vegetarians. They're not going to eat these guys. They're going to try and kind of avoid them probably because the larger alligators are going to eat the nutria. So yeah, if you have any questions, I'm actually reading the chat, so you can put those in there. Because other than that, like I said, I'm not going to talk too long, and I'd love to answer some questions about this guy if you have them. What do alligators do to stay warm when it's cold? So that's a good question, especially since we had that large cold spell like last week. So they don't really do anything to stay warm. They're considered cold-blooded animals, which means they can't really regulate their body temperature. They're like other reptiles. They need some other source to keep them warm. So they'll go out and sun themselves. So what they'll do when it freezes like we had like last week, where it hard freezes and all the ponds and lakes kind of freeze over, they'll go over to an area where they're safe, stick just their nose above the water, just that little bit right there where their nostrils are coming up, and then they just kind of shut down. A lot of people think they hibernate. They don't really hibernate. No animals in Louisiana actually truly hibernate. They don't really go to sleep. They just kind of shut down certain body systems, and they go into like a power safe mode, and until it warms up, and then they're just off back like normal. So yeah, they don't really stay warm. The only time they can stay warm is if they're sunning themselves, laying on the grass. And I don't know if you can hear them, but these at this age, they actually make a little noise. I'm not sure if he just heard one or just cried out. It's this little, I don't want to say a chirping noise, but it's basically him calling out for mom. I'm surprised how small the 2-year-old alligator is. When they do, and do they have a big growth spurt? Is teenage years like humans? So they will have like, it's not really like humans where they just shoot up. Their growth is actually determined by how much they eat. So alligators can eat at different times. Whatever they can catch is how much they grow. Now, at alligator farms, where this guy is usually kept at, or where he came from, if they're in an alligator farm, they're going to feed them and feed them and feed them and feed them. So those alligators, if you go to like an alligator farm, those alligators are much larger than their wild counterparts. So in the wild, there's not really a set like time of how big they are. It just depends on how much they've eaten is how big they are. Do alligators camouflage? They do. They actually have several ways of camouflaging themselves. So like this guy, you can see he's got those yellow stripes. That helps like blending in at this young age, but I don't really have anything here to really show. But at the older age, when they're larger like this, at this age, they'll actually start picking up sticks and putting the sticks on top of themselves and actually make them look just like a log. And birds will like look at those sticks and be like, that's just a log with a bunch of sticks on it. I can probably use some of these sticks to build a nest, or I can land on it safely. And they'll go down, and that's how they actually catch birds. Because a lot of people may be confused about how an alligator that's swimming catches a bird that flies. And that's how they do it. They just camouflage themselves and sit very still and wait for the bird to come to them. Do alligators migrate? So they don't migrate from large areas to large areas. Male alligators will migrate from like one pond to another. They'll kind of move a little bit during certain parts of the year, trying to find other alligators. But generally, they find an area. If there's food in that area, they're going to want to stay in that area. If there's not as much food in that area, they'll go and look for another area. They don't just constantly move just to move. How long do alligators live? So that's one of those questions in biology that's like, well, we don't really have a set answer, and it depends on where you look at. I always teach in biology, biology is the science of exceptions. And alligators, the lifespan is, depending on where you look up, 30 to 50 years. Typically, well, I'll just say they live about the same as humans. So there's alligators that have lived up to 100 years. Generally, it's the same as humans. Alligators that are captive alligators, like in an alligator farm, they're going to live a lot longer. In the wild, they're not going to live as long because they've got things that want to eat them. So a lot more baby alligators will be eaten, but the ones that do survive will probably live a lot longer. How far north do alligators live? So that's a good question. I don't know the effective range of an alligator, because I know a couple of years ago they actually found an alligator in up around Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So they're kind of moving around looking for food. Generally, you're not going to find an alligator in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. That's way too north for them. But so they'll move around. Maybe it was a pet, maybe it's just got lost. So their range typically is in the southern states. So like Louisiana, Arkansas usually has a few, not quite as much as Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida. When people think of alligators, they're typically going to think Louisiana. Louisiana has the record for the largest alligator found. I think second only to Florida. Now, Louisiana's first, Florida's like second. Do alligators poop in grass or water? So it's kind of just wherever they just go. They're not picky. They don't have bathrooms. What is the age of the oldest living alligator? So the oldest living alligator, it was, I don't think they have the actual age, but it was up around 100, maybe a little more, right around 100 years. Where do alligators live? So typically, well, whenever I talk about alligators, specifically, if you're in Louisiana, you kind of need to know about alligators. The advice we give, if there's water in Louisiana, assume there's an alligator. Louisiana waters are very plentiful in food sources. So if there's water and there's a food source, there's gonna probably be an alligator. Now, it's like a little creek. I don't know if y'all have been to Walter B. Jacobs Nature Park where I work, but we have like little bitty bayous. Typically, there's not going to be an alligator in a little bayou, but like Cross Lake will have alligators. There have been sightings of alligators in the Red River. So any larger bodies of water definitely has an alligator. What is the difference between alligators and crocodiles? That's a good question. And normally, I could easily point out the difference on, well, I don't know if you can't really tell on that guy. So one way you can tell the difference is if you look at their head straight up and down like that. And you can see it's kind of like basically a U shape right there. Not a long U shape, but just a basic U shape. That is an alligator. Alligators will have this basic kind of short, blunt U shape. A crocodile will look more like their teeth. It's much longer and comes to much more of a point. Also, this alligator, and I know for this guy, it's really hard to see. See if I can get close. You might be able to see a few teeth right there. But alligators, the only teeth you're going to see are going to be pointed down. When they have, whoa, there you go. When they have their mouths closed, you're only going to see teeth pointing down. Crocodiles, if they have their mouths closed, you're going to see teeth going up. You're going to see teeth coming down. So that's one of the biggest ways you can tell the difference in an alligator. And also, if it's in Louisiana, it's an alligator. We don't have crocodiles in Louisiana. How do alligators live? So they live in the wild. They, let's see, they live up to 30 to 50 years. They just kind of sit around. Most of the day, they're sitting around. They're being very still in the water, and that's their way of hunting. They don't actively hunt things. They're more of an ambush predator. They're going to sit in the water with just their little heads and sit above, just their eyes, little nose, and wait for things to come to them. So this guy, you can kind of see that his eyes and the tip of his nose right there, they're both kind of just raised just a little bit. And those little raised parts, his nostrils and his eyes, are going to be one of the only things poking above the water. So they're just sitting there waiting for things to kind of come toward them, and then they snatch them up and eat them. How are their temperaments? And this guy, I don't want y'all to get the wrong impression with this guy. He's just kind of relaxed right now. He's just kind of like, okay, we're doing this again, another program. Just going to sit here. In the wild, if there's an alligator, you're just not going to want to get near them because they're not really aggressive. A lot of people think, oh, this alligator's aggressive. They're not aggressive. They're very defensive. A lot of animals that people say are aggressive are actually very defensive. They have their area. They're going to defend their area. Especially mother alligators they're the ones I will say are aggressive. They're very aggressive in that they are going to protect their nest. They're going to protect their babies. Anything that gets near them, you're going to know because they're going to come after you. Typically, they're going to be like, oh, there's a person over there. I'm just going to sit still unless they're hungry. And unfortunately, some people will walk their dogs next to water that has alligators in it. And if the dog is small enough and the alligator is hungry enough, it will go after the dog. Why do they have to live in the water? So they live in the water, one, because of their large size. You know, an alligator that's probably over 100 pounds, 500 pounds, that's a lot of weight to move around. You know, that's basically an extremely large amount of weight. It takes a lot of energy to move that much muscle around on the land. So if they're in the water, it's actually much easier for large animals to move around. So think of whales. Whales are extremely large animals. So they live in the water, they live in the ocean where it's actually very easy for them to move around and at kind of high speeds. Now, an alligator's maximum speed is 20 miles per hour, but that's in the water. Yeah, out of the water, they're not terribly fast. They can kind of sprint a little bit, but they're not fast. If some people will say, oh, if you see an alligator and you have to run away, zigzag, because the alligators can't turn. That's actually not really true. You can outrun an alligator going straight ahead. You know, they got little stubby legs. They can move quick for short periods of time on land, but generally just kind of, if you have to run away from an alligator, just run straight. Do alligators like warm weather or cold? So they love warm weather, and that's not just because they're cold-blooded and they use warm weather to keep themselves warm. It's also because that's when the food is most plentiful. That's when birds are most active. That's when their food sources are kind of moving around. So it's not just because they just like to stay warm. It's because that's when their food sources are most active. A lot of their behavior is just dependent on their food sources. How do alligators die? So alligators in the wild, typically it's going to be because they're this size and a bird catches them. Large fish can catch these guys at this size. Once they get over a certain size and they're eating everything else, a lot of it's humans. Humans will catch them. Humans will hit them with a boat. Some people will hit them with a car if they're crossing the road and they can't move quick. Few of them die of old age. Not many alligators will do that. Are there any major benefits to alligators for the ecosystem? Tons. So these guys are very important to the ecosystem. That's a good question. So a lot of people are thinking, you know, these guys, they're just top predators. They eat all the cute animals. Well, where they live in swamps and stuff, you actually need big predators like this to take care of the ecosystem. You don't want an overpopulation of deer. You don't want an overpopulation of nutria. You don't want an overpopulation of raccoons and all these other animals because they're going to, you think about it, these guys eat all the plant eaters. Well, if you get rid of all the alligators that eating the animals eating all the plants, all those animals that eat the plants, they're going to eat all the plants. And all of a sudden, the whole ecosystem crashes. If you get rid of too many predators holding back the plant eaters, all the plants are gone. And if all the plants are gone, all animals are gone. So it's just like a chain. So they're at the top of the food chain. If you start taking away the top, it's going to crash the whole thing. All right. What is the name of the bird that cleans an alligator's teeth? So I know what you're talking about, and I can't think of the actual name of the bird. I'd have to look that up. I know there are like a few things that will go up to an alligator. If they're not hungry, generally they're not going to just catch an animal. So these guys, when they get to a large size, they're going to eat once a week and they're done. They're just going to digest. So they'll open their mouths. And a lot of animals will see that, hey, this guy's not hunting, and there's like little bits of food in there. So some birds, some little birds that, you know, they're going to look at and be like, well, that animal's not big enough and worth me eating. They're not going to really care about them, and they'll come over there and kind of peck at things. So that's actually, you know, a lot of people don't think about that, but that's actually pretty common in the animal world. They're an upper limit temperature where they can just rest because their food isn't active. Not really. So their food, if the food is active, they're going to go after it. If their food isn't available, they're going to go look for food. So it's not really dependent on, you know, temperature, if their food's active or not. Unless it's wintertime, they're going to kind of slow down like everything else. But if it's really just depending, there's no real set limit on anything like that. It's just kind of like, is it active or not? If it's not active enough, they're going to go look for it. How long have alligators been around? Oh, that's a tough question. So alligators and reptiles like this, they've been around for millions of years. We actually have fossils of alligators, or not really alligators, but the alligator ancestors, where their skulls, just their skull of their head, they found them, and it's about the size of a car. And we don't have those size anymore, but millions of years. These things are very old as a species. And that's because they do very well. You know, they're very adapted to their environment. Why do crocodiles not live in Louisiana? So it's a geographic barrier. So you're going to have crocodiles in things like Africa. The Nile River, very well known for having crocodiles. Australia have very large amounts of crocodiles. And so they're all kind of across the ocean. Alligators and crocodiles, they can survive some amounts of salt water, but they're not going to be able to swim across the ocean. They really don't have any way of surviving that long of a distance. When you get out in the middle of the ocean, there's no food. There's no point for them to go there. So they're not going to cross the ocean to get to a new place like that. Now, can they survive in Louisiana? Absolutely. They probably love it in Louisiana. There's a lot of food here for them, but they're just not going to be able to cross that ocean. Do alligators have prey? They do. Now, not so much when they get to a large size. When they get to a large size, everything else is the prey, not them. At this size, okay, but I said that wrong, actually. Sorry about that. Prey. So alligators prey on everything at large sizes. So alligators are the predators. Prey is what they eat. Sorry about that. Too early in the morning. But no, they will prey on any animals they can fit in their mouths. If it can fit in their mouths, they're going to consider it prey. Now, some animals like little bitty birds, like these little songbirds that you may see at bird feeders around, they're going to look at that and be like, that's not worth the energy for me to catch. So they're not really going to consider trying to catch that. They're going to consider things that are worth more. So things like a raccoon, big, a lot of tissue, a lot of muscle, a lot of fat. They're going to look at that and be like, that's a good prey out. I'm going to go after that than like a little songbird. How long is the legal alligator hunting season? So I'm pretty sure it varies. I'm not an expert in hunting at all. So in Louisiana, we do have not a large surplus, but we do have enough alligators where they can kind of be hunted in small amounts. And that actually varies from year to year. That number changes every year. Biologists with the Louisiana Wildlife and Fisheries will actually go out and measure, how many alligators are active, how many alligators are in the wild. And that's what they base that number off of. So I don't want to give like this is the actual date because I don't actually know, but I do know the numbers of how much they can catch changes. Can alligators freeze? So yes, they can. They can most definitely freeze. Now it takes a lot. They're not like us. They're actually very hardy because when it got cold like last week, a lot of them stuck their nose out of the water before it froze, and their entire head was basically frozen in the ice. When they're out there in the wild, their head freezes. It's in solid ice. So they can freeze, and as long as they don't freeze for long periods of time, they'll be fine. They actually kind of shut down a lot of things, and they'll survive that way. So they can freeze, and as long as it's not a long period of time, they'll be fine. How do alligators see, hear, and smell? So alligators, they see with their eyes, and they actually have several eyelids. Like we have one eyelid that open and closes. If our eyelids are closed, we can't see. They actually have several eyelids. One, if they're in the water, they're going to have another eyelid that closes that protects their eye, and but they can still kind of see. And then they can shut their entire eyelid and just kind of protect everything solid. So they have very good eyes right there. See if I can get close. You can kind of see that eye is partially closed right there. Oh, it's kind of opening up. So then they can smell not very well. They don't really smell too much with that nose right here. They've got two little nostrils at the very end of their snout. So they don't really smell for predators. But the way they hear, because they don't have ears, they're not like us. I've got headphones on, but we have ears that we hear with. These guys, they sit in the water, and they're going to feel all the vibrations around them. So it's kind of like snakes. Snakes don't have ears. They can sense things. They just feel vibrations in the air around them, and especially in the water. Water transmit vibrations very well. So they can tell, where things are by that. In some ways that the alligators can communicate to each other is they vibrate the water real heavily. There are American crocodiles in South Florida. So yeah, there's actually a few alligators in Florida, crocodiles in Florida. There's not many. So a lot of people, when they talk about alligators and things like that and crocodiles, generally they're not going to bring it up because they don't want to confuse people. But there are like it's a very small number. There's not like huge number. So In Louisiana, we don't have any unless a stray crocodile from Florida came up, which generally is not going to happen. There's just too much human development between us and them. So there's like a very, very small amount. And that's only, like I said, South Florida. Why are alligators in Mardi Gras? It's just people associate Louisiana with Mardi Gras and they associate Louisiana with alligators. Louisiana has the record largest alligator ever found at 19 feet 3 inches. So people are going to be like, Louisiana, alligators, Louisiana, Mardi Gras. And they just kind of assume that. There's no real reason why alligators are in Mardi Gras. Do alligators like hot, warm, or cold? So generally, they're going to like warm. They're not going to want to be too hot. They don't sweat. If they get too hot, they're just too hot. Now, they can just go in the water. If they get too hot, they're going to sink down to the bottom of the water of where they are and keep cool. But they have no real way of regulating their temperature. Like, if we get too hot, we're going to sweat. That kind of cools us off via evaporation. They don't have sweat glands. They can't do that. So they want to stay just right around in the 70s would be probably maybe toward the 80s, but not much more than that. They just want to stay kind of right there. And that's how they regulate their body temperature, but just by going down and sunning themselves. They don't want to be too cold. They don't want to be too hot. So they just want to be kind of right in the middle. How do alligators eat? Well, they eat by catching things in those big mouths and then using their large teeth. Like I said, here's a large alligator tooth here. And they just grab things with these things, grab them, puncture them, hold them tight, and then just turn. And they'll like either crush their prey or drown their prey, depending on the size. And then they just swallow it whole. That's why if it can fit, we always say if it can fit in their mouths, they're going to eat it. So alligators, if like, especially at this size, if his mouth is open, it actually in the back of their mouth, it actually shuts. So if when his mouth is open at this age, he can't eat anything when this mouth is open. It has to be shut and then they can swallow. So it has to be able to fit in their mouths. And it just stops water from coming in their mouths when they open their mouths in the water. Can we see alligators at Walter B. Jacobs Nature Park? So generally, yes. This guy actually lives at the park. Now, we don't have any wild alligators in the park. If you go out into our little, we've got 2 bios that kind of combine together in one area, and then we've got little ponds around. There's no alligators living in there, but this guy does live at our park. If we were open, our inside nature center is where this guy lives. Now, right now, the nature center is not open to the public due to the pandemic, but when we are open to the public, this guy actually has a little, basically, it's a pretty nice tank, has flowing water, plants, and like a little waterfall that this guy lives in. So when we're open to the public, you can actually come in and see this guy kind of living in his little tank. Are you holding a real alligator? This is a real alligator. So earlier when I first got him out, I called him a wiggle worm because he was just kind of wiggling all around. He's actually real. If I can make him move a little more. No, he's just going to sit there now. Alligators, when they get comfortable, they're just going to sit around. They don't want to, if they don't have to spend energy, they don't want to. They're not really lazy. They're just going to use all their energy to hunt and find food. He's so cute. He is. A lot of people are like, when they see him at this age, they're like, he's so cute. You know, look at that. I want one as a pet. And that's why we don't name our animals at the park, because we don't want people thinking, oh, this is a cute animal. I want one as a pet. Alligators outgrow pet size very quickly. And then you have people kind of like, well, what do I do with this thing? And they're not great pets. They would be a very expensive pet. you've got to buy them food, and at a certain size, at this age, we're feeding him like little bitty mice, just tiny little mice that you can just buy in bulk. But at some point, those mice have to get bigger and bigger until you're feeding them whole chickens. That gets expensive. They're not good pets. Do some alligators live in the desert? They're not going to live in any real desert. There's not enough food sources in a desert. Now, a lot of people will think that deserts are just dry places. There's nothing out there. North America has a few deserts. One is actually in southern Arizona. The Sonoran Desert is probably a gorgeous desert. And there are a lot of, there's moving now. There's a lot of animals that live out there and stuff, but alligators, I'm pretty sure, are not one of them. They're not going to want to sit around and have that few sources of food. They're going to want to be in an area like South Louisiana. There's a ton of things for them to eat. So it's all contingent on how much food is available to them, is where they're going to live. And alligators change color. I'm saying colors. So not like if you see a lizard crawling on a wall or a gecko or something that'll just like sit there and change colors from green to brown. These will change colors over time. So you see that yellow on him. Over time, those yellow scales will actually fall off and it'll get a lot darker. So this is an example. I have a model of an alligator here. So the babies on that model right there have yellow, but the mother alligator has no yellow, except maybe the underside. But on the top, there's no yellow. Once they get to a certain age, they don't need that yellow anymore to hide. So they do change colors, but only after so many years. They don't need that camouflage anymore. But they're not going to just sit here and change colors just to hide. Thanks. I think they're talking about the alligator, not me.
All right. You guys have any more questions? All right. Well, I want to say thank you to Dillon and Walter B. Jacobs Nature Park and the little baby alligator for joining us today, and all of you. And be sure to join us on March 27th, where we'll learn about vultures. So I hope you all enjoyed your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Mom,